What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to Redonkulous Gaming. Today we're here to talk about Protection Warrior, and we're going to go ahead and stack rank all 4 covenants and their abilities that you gain by joining a covenant with your Protection Warrior. And we're going to use just a number of criteria to just try to level set the way that we're ranking these. There's a lot of different ways that you can look at these things, and just to make this as clear cut as possible, I am only grading based on the following criteria. First of all, I'm approaching each covenant as a Protection Warrior and a Protection Warrior only, not Fury, not Arms. This is strictly for Protection Warriors. Next up, I'm also projecting this based on the early stages of the expansion. So, in other words, when we look at what we know about the expansion, we know what generally Mythic Plus and that first affix looks like. We know generally what Castle Nathria is going to look like. For the most part, there's still some testing going on, and then we have a pretty good idea of what Torghast is going to play. Those are the 3 main things that I'm going to be focused on, which translates right into point number 3, is that I'm going to pick my Covenant ability simply based on the fact that it's going to enable me to do more than one type of content. In other words, I want to do Torghast, I want to do Mythic Plus, and I want to raid, and I want to do all of them as effectively as possible. What I will say is that there are some abilities that are going to play more into the Mythic Plus scene, some that will play more into raiding, and some that's more for solo type content. So all that being said, I'm going to stack rank the ability and put an ability that enables me to do all 3 types of content better than I would something that's super strong for just raiding or super strong for just Mythic Plus. So more than one type of content is a requirement for me, and I'm also doing this video by excluding the conduit system. A lot of reasons for this, guys, but the biggest one is it should be fairly obvious. Blizzard is not done making changes. If anything, we're going to continue to see soulbinds and conduits nerfed while they enhance likely the class or covenant ability, simply because Blizzard wants that to be something that's more tied to your identity. And we'll also likely see, and they've already kind of announced that they're going to enhance legendary powers a little bit more. So by removing conduits from the conversation, yes, things drastically change as soon as you add conduits into the mix, but at the same time, those are the easiest things at this stage for Blizzard to change if they still plan on putting this game out this year. So that's the way that we're going to go about it, and without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in. At my number 4 ranking, I have Necro Lords. Necro Lords is finishing at the bottom of the barrel for me, and we'll go over why here in the next couple of minutes. First of all, the first ability that you gain, regardless of what class you join Necro Lords on, is Fleshcraft. And just to kind of review what that ability is, it is something that you channel for 4 seconds. At the end of those 4 seconds, you gain an absorption shield, which has either 20 all the way up to 50% of your baseline health as a shield. It's really up to you where it ends up channeling and finishing on that spectrum in terms of what the shield strength is, because if you channel it near the corpse of a fallen enemy or enemies, the shield will get stronger, but it caps out at 50%. And at the low end, if you're not channeling near anything, you're at least going to get a 20% absorption shield. So that's something that is worth calling out for tanks specifically. But what I will say is that is not something that is going to really make or break you as a tank. So don't feel obligated to go with Necro Lords, whether you're thinking Protection Warrior or another class, simply because of the shield. It's just not strong enough to be considered something that should change your approach to the game. Now, Conqueror's Banner is the warrior-specific ability that you get from joining Necro Lords. If you're not familiar with what this is essentially a buff in the form of a banner that you place on the ground. It's going to grant 20% maximum health, 10% critical strike to you and 2 allies that are within 15 yards of the banner. This is going to last for 20 seconds. This is not all that great, guys. It does grant you glory, which grants you rage, and it's going to help your overall throughput, but the main issue that I have with it, and that it seems a lot of you guys have had with it, is that it's something that you plant in the ground. It's got a 15-yard radius, and that's it. If you're forced to move, or a fight forces you to move out of the vicinity of the banner, you lose your buff. and that's it. And it's only up for 20 seconds, so you better get right back in before it despawns, or you're going to lose your 20% maximum health, 10% critical strike rating to you and 2 allies. So it's something that you need to be very cognizant of in terms of where you put it. And that is a problem. And it's not only a problem to me, it's a problem to a couple of you guys. So, one comment, they better make the banner attached to the warrior's back so that you become like a living totem radiating the buff only for those who followed you into battle. Makes sense. Couldn't agree more. Really great idea, and absolutely a way that they should look at tweaking this ability. Yet another comment, what about putting the banner on your back like a Blade Master, and your teammates have to stay close to you? Again, there's a common theme here. Couple of comments. You guys are already agreeing with one another. They need to do something so that it becomes either mobile, and then I would go so far as to say is that this is a 3-minute cooldown ability. They are already giving you a legendary, which essentially gives Last Stand to your party anytime you use Last Stand. So Conqueror's Banner just doesn't feel as strong from a survivability perspective. So it really just becomes useful for that 10% critical strike rating, and that 10% critical strike rating is meaningless unless the banner is dropped in a place for absolutely everyone. So to me, the reason that this one finishes at the bottom of the barrel is because Conqueror's Banner is mostly a raid cooldown or a single target boss cooldown, and that's it. You're not necessarily going to get as much value from it in the Mythic Plus setting, and I really don't see how this projects all that well in Torghast, where you're slicing through enemies anyway. So that's where it's landed for me. You guys seem to already agree with this one. Necro Lords seems like the absolute worst one for warriors overall. Hopefully we'll see that change over time. I think you guys have suggested a really good fix here, which is strap it to the warrior's back. Make it something that's mobile, therefore useful. Great compromise. Alright, moving on. At number 3, I've got Night Fae. And to talk a little bit about Night Fae, their signature ability is Soul Shape. Soul Shape is where you transform into a Vulpin. This is going to allow you to teleport 15 yards forward, increase your movement speed by 50%, and you may reactivate Soul Shape every few seconds to teleport again. Ultimately, if you're not in a rest area, you can cast Soul Shape and then 2 teleports over the course of the 12 seconds that it's active, and then it'll expire. So it gives you a little bit of an idea of what kind of mobility it gives you, and it's pretty substantial. So shout out to Soul Shape for just giving a little extra mobility to the warrior class, although it's not anything that you're necessarily wanting for all the time between Charge and Heroic Leap, but it's certainly something that that does help. Now, let's talk about Ancient Aftershock, which is your class covenant ability that's granted to you. This thing looks and feels very much like Phalanx Stomp for the Brewmaster Monks. This is where you're going to unleash a wave of anima. This is going to deal a percentage of attack power, and it's going to knock them down for 1.5 seconds. And then after the initial cast where you have that knockdown effect, any enemy up to, I believe it's capped at 5 right now, is going to continue to be knocked over every 3 seconds. So this is something where if you're pulling large trash mobs, it gives you the ability to essentially have an extra interrupt for the 12 seconds in which Ancient Aftershock is up, because it's going to continue to knock down those spellcasters. So it's something that you can use to your advantage as effectively as crowd control, because 3 seconds is generally not long enough for mobs to get an extra cast off on you. So that's something that's actually really cool about Ancient Aftershock. The other thing that it does is that it's going to generate 16 rage per enemy over the 12 seconds that are caught within your Ancient Aftershock. So the blue swirlies, if you have 5 total targets in there, which is the target cap, you're going to gain 80 rage over the course of those the 16 seconds, or I'm sorry, the 12 seconds, and that's ultimately what's going to power your active mitigation skills. It's everything that's going to power your damage output, so on and so forth. So it's going to act as an interrupt for you for really trash, essentially, and it's going to act as a rage generator. And then it also does a pretty good amount of damage, both initially as well as damage over time effect. So let's talk a little bit about this one. This is an ability that I feel can be very strong for Mythic Plus purposes, where you might be a little rage starved at times. More often than not, though, when you're pulling large packs like that, you're going to be more than fine on rage generation. The real value comes from the knockover effect, which acts as the an extra crowd control or an interrupt for caster mobs. That's actually really nice and something that I really enjoyed having in dungeons. But then when when you zoom out and you look at the PvE picture as a whole, I can say, okay, check. I feel like I can effectively run Mythic Plus with Ancient Aftershock. I can run dungeons. It'll feel pretty darn good. I can probably jump into Torghast. It'll feel very similar because it's going to allow me to run the solo content as well as group content. It brings a little extra something to it, both in the terms of rage generation as well as interrupts. But then I look at single target encounters, both Mythic Plus bosses as well as raid bosses, and right now half of Castle Nathria is single target bosses, not bossing, and that's where it starts to fall short, because when you talk about generating 16 rage per enemy over 12 seconds, I am gaining rage at such a shallow clip when it's a single target enemy that the main thing that brings me at a boss fight is really only the damage output, and that's just not enough for me. It's not anything that, hey, if you stand in the Ancient Aftershock, you gain X% mitigation or anything like that. I think that's something they could do to ultimately fix this ability, but as of right now, when I look at where it's strong and where it's limiting, this is strong in Mythic Plus or multi-target type content, and it's very weak in single target type encounters like raids or bosses in dungeons. So overall, between the Necro Lords and the Night Fade, they came pretty close to neck and neck in terms of their overall viability. I think there's a number of things that they can do to fix the Necro Lords. I think there's only a certain number of things they can do to really make Ancient Aftershock work, because I think they like the design of it, because this is now the second class that they've essentially put this skill into. I already mentioned the monks got Phalanx Stomp, and it works very similarly. The main difference is that in Phalanx Stomp, it applies a debuff, which mitigates 5% of all damage incoming to anyone affected by Phalanx Stomp. There's nothing like that for Ancient Aftershock. It's strictly just a rage generator, as well as an active interrupt every 3 seconds. So if they were to add a little something to this, even if it's just stand in your blue swirlies and you get a flat out 5% damage mitigation from the targets affected by Ancient Aftershock, which again, it is capped at 5, I think that would actually help give this one a little bit more of a leg up. So as of right now, it definitely needs some help. Alright, my number 2 ranking, and this came really close to being my number 1, guys, is the Carnion, and a couple of reasons for this. Let me first start by saying I am not a huge fan of Spear of Bastion, which is the class Covenant ability you gain by joining Carnion. Instead, the main thing that I'm attracted to is actually the Summon Steward ability. And the reason for this is, even though it's a signature ability given to every class that joins the Covenant, the ability is improved for classes that do not have a baseline cleanse. And so, if you don't know what Summon Steward is, this is where you summon your Swolkin, and it delivers to you 3 Phials of Serenity that can be consumed to restore health, which is actually the part that I care the least about, but it also acts as a complete cleanse for all curse, disease, poison, and bleed effects. And that to me makes this Covenant more attractive than any other Covenant just for that alone, because you have that on a 5-minute cooldown. You can use 3 potions within 5 minutes if you really want to. Summon your Swolkin again, and your Steward will come and drop off another 3 Phials of Serenity. And that's really neat to have as a class for a warrior that just does not have a baseline cleanse or the ability to cleanse themselves. I think back in the day, all the way back to vanilla, and there was a trinket, the Lufa trinket, that would cleanse bleed effects and everything, and it was super powerful and dungeon type content, and that's what it reminds me of, is just having something like that again, but you don't actually have to equip it, and it's something that is on demand, 3 uses, feels real good to have. But then I look at Spear of Bastion, and I'm significantly underwhelmed, as I am for a good chunk of these warrior abilities. But Spear of Bastion is the class ability granted to warriors, which is where you're going to throw a spear at a targeted location. You're going to deal a percentage of attack power, and then you're going to do a small damage over time over the course of 4 seconds, and it's only going to hit 5 targets, and then after that it's diminishing returns. So once you exceed 5 targets, you'll have diminishing returns for the damage for Spear Bastion. The last thing that this gives you is a tether. So the little area of effect that Spear Bastion will actually show, there you go, there's a little circle around. Anything that steps outside of that circle is going to be tethered back to that location, and it can act as like a pull to just put everything right back to where it was. But again, it's only up for 4 seconds. It also grants me 25 rage just for casting it, which is kind of nice. So you're going to have to make sure you're not rage capped when you're actually using it, and you can use it as a rage generator. But it kind of stops there and falls pretty darn short, because I don't get anything without going through my soulbinds in the conduit system that really makes this a worthwhile ability to me. And when I look at the content that I'm going to be running, Torghast and Mythic Plus, as well as Raid, what I can say about this ability is that it feels strong as single target, but I think it falls down significantly for multi-target. And if we can learn anything from playing this game, as long as most of us have, it's that Blizzard loves encounters that has more than one target. So even though Castle Nathria actually looks to be roughly half single target raid fights right now, a good chunk of them, and likely a good chunk of them over the course of the expansion, are going to have quite a few mobs joining the battle. They're generally multi-target type fights, especially if you look at Nyalotha. Most of them are multi-target fights, and so Spear Bastion is only going to be useful for the 4 seconds where you can kind of tether things to that location. It's going to give you that initial rage buff, and then it's going to be strong against single target because it gives pretty good output to just a single target, but you've got diminishing returns beyond 5. So Spear Bastion is underwhelming right now. I think there's a couple of things that they can do to make this a little bit more attractive to multi-targets. The first thing is that they can make this thing stay up for longer than 4 seconds. I think there's some balancing issues there as you get into PvP, and those are the things that they have to consider too. But unfortunately, it falls down on the PvE side of things because of the fact that it's going to be limited in PvP. I think ultimately what they're going to have to do for skills that maybe are too powerful for PvP is they're just going to have to nerf them down and have them be kind of baseline as they are now. Maybe it only works for 4 seconds against player characters, and it's up for maybe, 8 seconds for non-player characters and the different trash mobs that you'll be pulling. That would be substantially more helpful to have a tether in place. It would also be great if maybe anything that was tethered was interrupted, or maybe you're given a baseline buff for just standing within the circle itself. Or another big is you can make that area of effect a little bit bigger as well, so that the damage over time hits more targets that maybe would be running into the tether. So there's a couple of things that I think they can do to fix this one. Spear Bastion itself is relatively underwhelming without looking into the conduits, as I already mentioned in the different soulbinds. But the thing that does get exciting, and the only reason why this is ranked number 2 and not number 1, is because Spear Bastion just falls short for me. But Summon Steward and the File Serenity, and having that as baseline and the ability to cleanse all negative effects on you is absolutely huge. And ultimately, Carnion really could end up being number 1 overall. We'll just have to see what ends up happening, what changes Blizzard makes, but I think this one could use a little bit of love from Blizzard. They're not too far off. They just can't limit it strictly because of the fact that it's not fair in PvP. In PvE, it just does not feel right. It doesn't feel like you're getting a lot of value outside of single target fights, and in this game, there's just not enough single target fights where you actually feel the value of Spear Bastion. Now, you're getting a ton of value from Summon Steward and File Serenity, though, so there's a pretty good trade-off there. So you're just going to have to do some internal soul searching to figure out which one makes sense to you, if it's going to be Carnion or if it's going to be one of these other covenants. At number 1, we've got Venthyr, and this is an interesting one, guys. So let's talk a little bit about this one, because I've seen some comments for this ability and some comments against within the warrior community itself. So first, let's talk a little bit about the signature ability, Door of Shadows. This is the teleport that used to be instant that is now a 1.5 second cast because the instant teleport was just way too strong according to everyone else. But it's on a 1 minute recharge, and this is just where you disappear and reappear in another location. That's about it. It can be made a little bit more, sexy through the conduit and soulbind system, but we're not talking about that for the sake of this video. What I will say, and just a quick shout out from a Door of Shadows perspective as a tank, is that there is one that allows you to disorient all of the enemies within the area that you pop out of your portal in, and I thought that was pretty cool. A neat little way to get the initial aggro while everything is disoriented before everyone opens up on the area. But other than that, I only really use Door of Shadows to do pulling as a warrior, so I just, to me it was just kind of a waste of an ability, but it will likely have more uses within the raid setting as well. It's just not nearly as strong as Soul Shape. Now, Condemn, being the class ability that you get from joining the Venthyr for warriors, is very interesting. This is an ability that actually will replace your execute button. 100% replace it. And it'll change the way that execute works, where historically you've been able to execute targets at 20% or less health, therefore giving you larger damage output and ultimately helping to finish off a boss towards the end, the tail end of a fight. Where this ability is different is that it can affect anything with 80% or above health and 20% and below health. So that's when you can use Condemn. Those are your windows. You've got a 40% health range on your target where you can actually hit Condemn. It costs anywhere from 20 to 40 rage to cast, so it does become a bit of a rage dump depending on how you're using it. And ultimately what this is going to do is it's going to weaken the target, preventing up to a percentage of damage that they would have dealt to you. So it acts as an active mitigation tool as well. Now, warriors are different than they are in retail right now for a number of reasons. What I will say is that Revenge is back in terms of the way it holds aggro. Thunderclap is less useful than it was before. You'll be using, it feels more like, and I know I've said this in some of my past videos, but just in case you haven't watched those, this feels like Burning Crusade Warrior to me. So those of you who are familiar or may have played Prot back in Burning Crusade, that's what it feels like, and that is very much a compliment. I think Warrior's in a very good place in terms of the play style right now, where you're not just mashing Ignore Pain for the heck of it and calling that your active mitigation. You're actually using the entirety of your toolkit. And when you throw Condemn in the mix, it actually forces you to make an interesting player decision. Where do I dump my rage into, fill in the blank ability, where I'm actively mitigating, hopefully, or I'm just DPSing as a protection warrior, or do I dump my rage into Condemn? And what I'm going to say is that this ability becomes entirely situational. So if we're talking raid bosses, generally you're pretty safe in the early stage of a fight to be hitting Condemn. It's because you're going to be hitting so hard, you're not going to have any issues holding aggro when you're using Condemn. And it's also early in a fight where healers have the most mana and they have the ability to heal you the most, but you're not necessarily sacrificing active mitigation just for the sake of doing damage. Condemn is going to do a little bit of both for you, and it might feel a little bit safer at the beginning of a fight to hit Condemn, knowing that your healers are likely capped on mana and likely have the mana to spare in order to keep you up. It's not going to be as strong as your pure active mitigation abilities, like your shield block, your shield wall, fill in the blank, your larger cooldowns, but it is going to give you some mitigation. It's, again, I cannot reiterate, this does not 100% replace your other active mitigation skills, but it is something that you can use in lieu of depending on the situation. At the tail end of a boss, when everyone is working to bring that boss down, you also are faced with the decision of, do I go ahead and max out my damage, or am I just trying to live here? And depending on the content that you're doing, you can make a meaningful choice between Condemn and hitting a little bit harder than you were before, while also actively mitigating some damage, or using your active mitigation skills, getting your shield wall up, potentially your last stand, whatever might be needed to get through a fight. And the meaningful choice that Blizzard has been talking about actually comes into play here. I think it's a really cool gameplay and player decision to give a player the ability to pick between condemn and fill in the blank ability based on what is needed in that current situation. And if I were to talk a little bit about, hey, does this translate for Mythic Plus and Torghast and Raid? My answer would be yes, absolutely. There's always going to be a place for condemn. So I think it's really cool too that it's not just giving you an extra button, it's making you think about, the time in which it makes sense to use condemn over other abilities. There's meaningful gameplay. This is an ability that's always readily available and gives you a little bit more identity to your class and your spec specifically than maybe any of the other Covenant abilities. The Soulbinds, again, I'm not going to run through them for this video, but you have some pretty cool Soulbind options as well, which will make this one worthwhile to you. So there's a number of things here that I really like about the ability. And then when you look at the 40% range, right, the first 20% of a boss or a mob and the last 20% of a boss or a mob in which you can actually use condemn, there's still a 60% range between 80 and 20% health that you're going to be playing warrior traditionally as you always have, and that's where the ignored pain will come back. That's where Avatar will come back. That's where you'll be running through the rest of your rotation and be using the rest of your kit, no problem. Not to say that you completely abandon those things, but again, it gives you the decision and the illusion of meaningful choice while playing your character, which again is pretty darn cool overall. So that's why I've ranked Condemn at the top right now. I think it is the most flexible of any of the abilities that you can gain while playing a warrior. I also think that there's a higher likelihood of it translating better for arms as well as fury than maybe any of the other ones as well. So that's kind of ultimately why it won out between over Carnion, I should say. So right now, Venthyr is where I'd be putting my Protection Warrior, or plan to be putting my Protection Warrior if Shadowlands were to go live today. But I do think that there is a good argument to be made for Carnion, considering Philo's Serenity. But the other two abilities obviously need some attention. So Ancient Aftershock for Night Fae, as well as Conqueror's Banner. They both need a little bit of love and attention from Blizzard. Hopefully we'll start to see those changes maybe this week. Well, we saw a lot of DK love and balancing happen over the last couple of weeks. Hopefully the Warrior is up next. I do think it needs the most attention to give you that meaningful choice between all four Covenants right now. But I also think that you've got two strong ones to choose from in both the Venthyr as well as Carnion. So let me know your thoughts, guys.